So,
Welcome. I am here with Liz Barney.
thank
She is
you.
the Director of Marketing and Community at Cahoots. And I suspect, given our pre recording chat, maybe we'll ask you how you came to have this role and how you got into co working. You are in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and before coming back to Michigan, you spent 10 years in Hawaii. So I'm dying to know how you got into co-working and how you went back to Michigan from living in Hawaii for 10 years. And I should give a quick preview to our guests. So Liz reached out because she ran an experiment and wanted to help others learn from this. And the experiment is around a member-led approach to community building and social events. And I think everybody's going to learn something from this, either like a shift in perspective or an actual approach they could take. So I can't wait to dive into that. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your background first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up here in Michigan
Okay.
and then moved away, and I
Did you
was
always
primarily
know,
in.
like, I'm going to Hawaii or like, no, I
So I,
can't handle the winter. Like, that's where I'm going. Was that like a vision or?
I actually went to school for education. So I was a special education teacher, and I graduated with that degree. And there were no jobs in Michigan, and they were recruiting in Hawaii. But I like to say the location didn't stick, but the location did. So yes, so I did a couple years of work in education out there, and then I kind of shifted into my own thing. So then I started taking photos and people started paying me for that. And then I started writing and I became a journalist. And then I started getting into video production. And all said and done, at the end of 8 years, I had a photography studio that I ran. It was a kind of an artist collective. So I had a lot of different artists that worked with me. And I had kind of a studio manager that handled the business side of everything to kind of like build a team of creatives where we could just be creatives. So I had that company. And then I also was doing some documentary and journalism work at the time. And some of those clients ended up turning into helping nonprofits with documentary style videos to tell their story and raise funds and different things like that. And so I had a lot of different things going. And COVID kind of provided this interruption where I, after that, had the opportunity to either expand my business to, I had an in person office. So I had like three other branches I could, or I had the opportunity to like look at ways to expand my business. And at that point, post pandemic, I think a lot of people had this reflection of, well, what do I actually want to do with my time and who I want to be around? And I thought this is probably the perfect time for me to move back to see my family. I had this thought of if I keep seeing my family once a year and I live like 40 more years, I'm going to see my family 40 more
Right.
times before I die.
Totally. You know what? I listened to a podcast recently because my parents are on the East Coast and I'm on the West Coast, and I see them once a year. And I had the same. I cannot move back to upstate New York, but I was listening to a podcast and the guy said the same thing, and I was like, okay, yeah, I got to work on that. Like that math is terrible. We can't do that. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though they're in
Yeah.
Michigan and you were in Hawaii.
Right. And a lot of my business was built in travel and tourism and all those things and hospitality, actually. And so I actually also during the pandemic, after my business had closed, one of my clients was a luxury hotel, which was auberge. And so they asked me to do some marketing during the pandemic when my business was shut down, and I did that. And then one of my studio was in the Four Seasons Hotel. So they started hiring me to do their in-house marketing with my team. And so then when I moved back to Michigan, they were opening up a new Four Seasons hotel in Minneapolis. And they asked me if I wanted to help them do that. And I was like, no, I'm not moving to Minneapolis. I moved
Oh,
back here to be in
yeah.
Michigan. But then they kind of came back a few different times. And then they came and they said, well, what if, you worked remotely and we flew you out once a month to help kind of like with these marketing and storytelling stuff. And I didn't have a lot of experience working remotely, but I didn't even have a lot of experience having a job. And so I went from, but I thought, I don't know what else I'm going to do. I'm in a brand new place. And so then I went from having a community of people that I was working with, doing all these collaborations and things, to working remotely in a new town where I don't know anyone really besides my family. And it was just a complete 180 for me where I was going crazy and I'm sitting there, at those morning stand-ups that everyone has, and I'm the only one that's remote and I'm kind of trying to listen and hear what's happening. And I just, I felt so left out.
Yeah.
And And meanwhile, I'm working on a lot of hospitality stuff, but with another community that's not even my community that I'm living in. So I wandered down to this co-working space that was right near where I lived. And I went to one of their like free trial day happy hour things. And it actually like the story of how I kind of started this initiative that we wanted to talk about is actually kind of inspired from this experience because I said, well, I met the marketing woman and she was kind of newer to marketing. And I said, well, me too, kind of, but why don't I can help you. We can do a little collaboration and maybe we can trade for membership, which I never used, but I'll just come and have lunch with you once a week and we can brainstorm some ideas to help you with stuff. And because I really just wanted to work on a project with people in person in my
With a live
community.
human. Yeah.
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 And so then that became my first experience with co-working and I started helping them with more things. And then after I got the hotel kind of launched and set up, like 8 months in, I was at the point where I said, you kind of need somebody now that it's established. You need someone to kind of maintain who's there day to day. And that'd probably be a better fit for you. And then I can kind of turn my attentions to things here because I also want to be more connected. And they agreed. So I kind of helped transition them to a new marketing person in Minneapolis and who lived there. And then I started doing my own thing. And then Cahoots, this co-working space that I've been volunteering for, said, well, can we pay you to help with some of this stuff? And so I started working with them a little bit and then a little bit more. And then I just kept doing more things until it kind of evolved. And so now I'm here usually 3 or 4 days a week working on things. So
Okay.
that was my
You
segue
totally. I love
to
it.
co-working.
I know, but it's the like typical pain point. It's like, well, you're lonely and you want to. So I'm curious though, did you know about co-working? Like how do you remember how you sort of thought like, okay, I'm going to go to this co-working space and go to this event and check it out? How did that happen?
I don't think I heard about it before since I wasn't really in the professional world, but I had. Okay, I was in New York, I think the fall previous to moving back with one of my co-producers on a documentary that I just finished. And we were working on this documentary project in New York and went to a WeWork, I think, one
Okay.
day. I
Yep.
remember. I think that was my only experience
That was it. You're
previously.
like, okay,
I
yes,
had
which
no
is
idea what to expect. Yeah.
totally. Well, what made you think I'm going to go to this co-working space in Ann Arbor?
I
Remember?
I don't remember.
Saw something somewhere and I
I
asked
probably started
because
Googling.
as a
Yeah.
marketer, you're the profile, right? That's like kind of elusive. It's like there are people who need offices, so they're easy to attract because they're looking for space. And then there are remote workers who, might know they need an office because they've been used to having an office. And then there's all these people like you who have this like sort of emotional need and social need to go to a co-working space. Like you don't need an office in this case, like you did in your previous life. So it's like how do you attract people like you and how do you, draw them in to show them what's possible? So you just somehow like stumbled into it and sort of believed like this might be the thing that I need. So I think
Yeah.
people often think of serving people like you in co-working,
Mhm.
but you're not the easiest to market to because you may not be like solution aware and you may have this like vague problem aware state.
Mhm. Mm.
You know what I mean? But you don't connect the dots like, oh, co-working is the thing. So I always think that's such an interesting problem and often the segment that people start co-working spaces for, and yet it's the hardest actually to market to. So, which you probably know
Yeah.
because you're working on
No.
some of those things.
For sure, and I think that I was definitely probably just Googling ways to meet people and then
Right.
looking up examples of that.
Yep.
So, I
Okay, but that's
mean,
a good
it's
insight.
definitely
So,
something that,
mhm,
people are looking for where they'd probably be Google, and that's
yep,
gonna be one of the things that's gonna come out is the way you can meet people is find a co-working space. So,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah. And you went to a specific event. So was it a trial day with a happy hour attached to it?
it was.
Yeah.
It was, but I was really just there for the happy hour,
Yeah.
so that was perfect
You
for
didn't
me.
necessarily think you needed to do this day pass, like work in another space. You were like, I just want to meet the people. And then just sort
Yeah,
of
I
fell
mean,
into
people are surprised when I tell them I'm an outgoing introvert. People think I'm an extrovert, but I'm not. And so a lot of times what's
Mm,
interesting is that I think that sometimes co-working spaces are only set up for
yeah,
extroverts.
sure.
And that's the thing, is that introverts want to be around people too, but we just work in different ways. And so
Mhm.
when I was just working here, I would have still paid for a membership, but I would have probably done most of my deep work in my home office by myself and then just come to these other things throughout the day and just having a space to kind of do my busy work or different things like that. So a lot of times, yeah, just having more structured ways to meet people could probably like pull me into
No,
then
I love this
yeah.
insight. I actually think we're gonna get momentarily into why we're here. But I think these conversations are so helpful because especially new operators, I think they think they're attracting you, and you are like a 5-day a month. You're like a casual user who needs to be drawn in potentially with like specific community events. And so that, thinking about segmentation and who are our offers for and what should we plan on in terms of who's going to use the space. Like if you can't probably fill up a space with Liz Barney's because you're like a casual user, even though you love it and you're now working in the industry. Okay,
Right,
so
and the thing oh, I was
no,
just
go
gonna say,
ahead.
and the thing to add to that is that although I've never paid for a membership here, I was here for a long time, coming specifically to work on things, and I think that introverts really connect with people through, like, a project or through a purpose, right? We skip the small
Mhm.
talk.
Yeah.
So going to all these happy hours and networking events when I first moved back was actually my literal nightmare, and so for me, I kind of created opportunities like, say, for example, saying, "Hey, why don't I be your free marketing consultant
Yep.
once a week?" And I think that there are probably a lot of other people where if there's a structure
Mm.
for them to actually
Yep.
add value, then you start to feel more comfortable with coming and being in the space more regularly and interacting, finding other ways to do that.
No, I love this. Okay, so yeah, let's dive in. So you you ran this experiment around sort of member-led community, just sort of to state at high level. So how did you come to think about this approach? Like why were you like, okay, let's instead of me or the community team sort of deriving, events, et cetera, like let's engage the community because I could see the mindset, of people listening being, and I would have been in the boat. Like, okay, well, they're paying me to belong here. So it's our job to, create all of the community events and to really like be in charge and make everything happen. And you sort of didn't, you just didn't have that mindset. You were like, well, I want to try this approach. So talk about the initiative and I'll dive in with some specific questions and sort of wait, what was your mindset in thinking like, well, let's get people involved instead of us just deciding what we're gonna do.
Yeah. So the 3-month experiment that we ran last fall was called the Community Committee. And the idea was to kind of the call to action was to any member kind of who wants to be the change you want to see. Like, let's just start a committee together and try out some ways that we can kind of be involved in that. And I think that the ideas for that were twofold. One is from obviously my personal experience of that. And when I started helping Cahoots more, I started creating more programming and different things that kind of connected to my experiences. Both I created programming for entrepreneurs because I've been a solo entrepreneur and done all that on my own, but then also for remote workers since I'd been in both people's shoes and felt the loneliness and isolation of both worlds. And as I was doing that and I trying to get people to come as I got more involved, what I found is that, as I mentioned, I'm an outgoing introvert and it can be draining. And I'm sure a lot of people in co-working spaces feel that, like, where so much of the job is you put it in the newsletters, you put it in the Slack channel or whatever, but then a lot of it is just engaging with people and just, hey, you should come to this. Hey, you should do this, and being the
Totally.
connector.
The
And when that's
galvanizer. I think Michelle Slater might have used that term. She's at Work Lodge in Houston and she talks about that role. To your point, it's like one thing to organize it, and then you need the person who has the like social energy to write open doors and be like, you need to come to this, which is can be a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, even at happy hours, right? People say I'm the in-person LinkedIn, despite me not really using LinkedIn personally for myself. People say I'm the impersonification of LinkedIn because I'll say, "Here's this person you need to talk to. I'm really good at introducing people and saying this is why this is your point of connection that you would bond over, and kind of then stepping back and watching those things form. And I can do that, but it also can become a lot. And it's a lot of burden for one person,
Mhm.
or just even the
Mhm.
staff of a co-working space. Because obviously I'm not the only person here. There's other people who are also doing that. We have, our executive director and our community coordinator. And even between us, it's still a lot to try to have those touch points constantly. And you can burn out, right?
Yeah,
Having to be on
totally.
all the time. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I thought there's a lot of great people who wanted to get involved and were starting to volunteer. And I kind of started bringing in people to volunteer on different things. Like we had a UX person, and I said, let's work on those creating the survey. So I started kind of having people come to me who wanted to get involved and try things. And so I'd kind of help work with them. And I saw, there's a lot of interest that's similar to what I had of I just want to be involved. Like I love, like everyone is like, we love being at Cahoots. We love being here and we want to feel like we can contribute to something here. And then also sometimes people have complaints or concerns or things. And it can also be overwhelming, for us to go, okay, well, we can't do all of this. And so
Yeah.
the thought was that maybe there's a way that we can provide people the same opportunity that I felt so rewarding. And then also probably for us, like alleviate the burden and empower them to create the experience that they wanted.
Okay. So how did it start?
Yeah, so we had a group of, I think it was 9 people sign up for the first one,
So you
and we just kind of
invited them. Did you send like a broad email or did you recruit?
yeah, I think that a lot of the people I already had connections with and had been working on different things with and had come to some other smaller things I'd organized, but I put out the fill out this form to apply to be part of this group, and there'll be some kind of reward or something, or just what and it was just like, here's your name, what is one thing that you could contribute or something like that, and people signed up. And so then obviously everyone was applied who was applied was admitted.
Mhm.
And then we had our first meeting, and we just started by asking people, what is it that you want people to feel when they walk into this space? Right. And so they just started brainstorming all these different things. And there were a lot of commonalities. People were putting up all the post it notes and stuff. And then it was kind of like, well, what are some of the things that we could try that could help? Like, what is the thing that could do that? And so then they started kind of coming up with ideas, and we kind of encouraged them to try a small thing, right? Because I think a lot of times people think of this great big grand thing, but then I liked that we were just trying out for 3 months. And so the ask was, how could we make this a very small thing, just a sample size, just to try a small thing that could then be built on in the future? And so then they started thinking of little small events or things like that. And I think that was really, I really appreciated doing it that way, because then everything was a sense of ownership. Instead of saying, all right, you're here and here's our task list for you to
Totally.
do, it was like, what do
Right.
you want?
Right.
And what do you
Again,
think are the problems?
yeah, back to like my worry, like, you're paying to be a member, but I'm recruiting you to this committee and here's your to-do list. Like you just totally flip
Hmm.
that to like, what do you want? And how do you
Hmm.
want to play a part in that? I love that. And
Because it's
so
your
the
idea and it's what you want.
yeah, exactly. And then they're in charge of deciding how to contribute. Okay, so the 4 key feelings, and there's a blog post about this, so we'll link to the blog post in the show notes as well, were belonging, support, connection, and empowerment. And I love
Mhm.
that empowerment came up because that's exactly what you're doing with this committee, right? Which is very cool. So it's like that drive was there and then you facilitated it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I was just looking at the blog post again. Like, what did I say? Yes.
I know
But
I made
yeah.
notes totally.
But
uh
so they came up with those different things. And then, yeah, the things that they had said where I know who people are and they know who I am. I have relationships where I can reach out for help personally. I feel empowered to ask for help and be supported professionally. And then just feeling a greater sense of community and connecting with others who share my interests. And a huge thing that came up for a lot of people is office culture. And a lot of people came from big tech offices that invest a lot of
mm,
money in this office culture. And
yep.
obviously, we have the standard offerings that any co-working space would have for happy hours or different social events. But yeah, it was like, yeah, how do you really compete with the office culture of a massive tech office like
Yeah.
that, right? And
When they
we
say
also had
office
quite a few contractors and entrepreneurs in the group as well who also had that, who wanted that, you know?
yeah. And when you say office culture, do you mean like they wanted sort of amenities and planned events? Or were they thinking more along the lines of how you felt? Like, I wanna, like, work with someone, like, I wanna be connected to people versus, like, maybe there were they most was the committee was it a mix? It sounds like you just kinda walked through that. Remote workers and then, like, entrepreneurs and freelancers, so kind of a mix of that group. Yeah,
Yeah, and some people are actually, so there's also people who are on small teams here, part of small teams here in the
okay.
space, right? So it's kind of everyone. Everyone wants
Yeah,
that office culture. And
yeah.
some of the small teams are here at our space because they like the office culture here. And
When you say office culture, because I
oh yeah.
almost feel like that has a negative connotation these days. So, like, when you say it, what do you think it means?
Yeah. So okay, sorry, that is your question. So I think that examples that people listed were, we used to always have a group that went to lunch on Tuesdays, or we used to have always
Mhm.
have this place that we went around the corner after work on this
Yeah.
day, or
Like
just
these
having to have a
routines of social, like, that
routine
you could
of
count on.
connection.
Yeah.
So, and some of the things that I would say that what came out in the things that they wanted to try kind of reflected like what office culture was to them, because one of the things was finding ways to start a volunteer initiative to go out and volunteer in the community, which a lot
Yeah.
of offices
Yeah.
do. One of them was starting an informal happy hour. So we have our once a month happy hour, but having an informal happy hour every other Thursday where they just go to a local bar around the corner. One of them started organizing group lunches where people walk down sometimes. Another person started a kind of like a morning meditation group for a little period of time. Someone else started a program to have one-on-one coffees with new members to kind of connect people one-on-one,
Amazing.
especially for introverts.
Mhm.
Someone else made name tags. So they tried out having, so name tags, especially for the part-time desks where people aren't always at the same
Yep.
place, having a name tag that they can put like some talking points for people to connect on, and kind of playing with that. We've also played with the having the I'm busy, but find me on Slack, or open to chatting. You can approach me. Like there were some initiatives around that to help facilitate people getting to know each other. So I think it's just that general sense of knowing people around you and having that sense of camaraderie and yeah, just having more of the connection. And I think that actually the connections made from working on the committee together probably then also transferred into that sense of office culture, right? Because
Totally.
one of the biggest things that people, when we reflected back after 3 months, said that it was really cool to have a project they were working on with a person in person, and they created deeper friendships and connections with each other as a result.
Totally. No, I love that you walk through the office culture because I think and you may not, because you were not sort of like long-term an office sort of person. I
No, I'm like, I've
read
never had an office.
yeah, 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 which is so interesting. But, there's so much talk in the media today and certainly I mean, the algorithms shape this, but, on LinkedIn, you don't spend any time on LinkedIn. So good for you. There's a lot of chatter in the, like, workplace circles about, it's not just about, kegs and ping pong and golf simulators, and it's not about those things. Like, so I love the examples you gave, like, it's
Mhm,
about, like, having a group of people that you enjoy that go to lunch every Friday. Like, I remember my first
mhm,
job out of business school, we would go to Potbelly's on Fridays. And we had a little group, that would go, and it was, like, the highlight of the week, and you're totally right, like, things like that, that you just miss, and if you're sort of casually surrounded by people, but you don't have those routines with those people, it's nice, you feel like you have exposure to other humans, but you don't have, that deeper sense of connection and belonging, so, I mean, those are simple things. What I love is, like, they're very simple, but also, like, one community manager or two community like, cannot manage all of those things, right? So you found this way to help the members, like, sort of raise their hand around, like, what do they want and help them be more empowered, which is also what they want. It's like It's like a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you're making me think of something because yeah, the people are like, what is office culture? Does that mean we have more takers? But then I guarantee, I don't know, like I bet a lot of spaces then plan all these different social events that nobody show up
totally.
to because I've definitely
100%.
had that experience
Yeah.
where when I first started volunteering, I don't even remember. This might have been before I was even getting paid here. I don't know. It all just blurs together. I've just always been here in some capacity. But we had some member who had an idea. They wanted to do a rock, paper, scissors competition. They're super creative. They thought it'd be fun to have a rock, paper, scissors tournament. And there's actually like a really cool boutique gift shop around the corner from us called Rock, Paper, Scissors.
Oh,
And so we thought we'll do this. We'll have, a few different months we'll have this. And we actually got Rock, Paper, Scissors to sponsor it with prizes. So Rock, Paper, Scissors sponsored by Rock, Paper, Scissors. It was
uh-huh.
silly. It was fun. But then nobody showed up except for the person who was their
Who
idea.
organized it.
I mean, their friends, but it was very small. It wasn't really, and
Yeah.
it's just the thing is that there's so many things. And so I think that maybe what's different, what I saw for these initiatives is it was it's different when you have this the co-working space staff always inviting you to everything and it's kind of like it's their job and
Yeah.
also you're just kind of on repeat. Are you coming to happy hour? Are you coming to lunch? But then
Mhm.
also if you're inviting them, you can also if you get five people to show up, you can't have one-on-one conversations with five people. And if they're just coming to talk to you, that's not really sustainable either. And so I think that what's cool with these events is that because it was not my event or Cahoots event, but their event, they then felt empowered and inspired to go individually talk to people because an in-person invitation one-on-one is
Yeah.
a much more effective, right? And it was kind of expanding and then kind of expands our reach. And I think that helped solidify between the one-on-one copies, the name tag conversations with the person, the other people individually reaching out to them. I think that helps create this ripple effect where all of a sudden everyone is inviting everyone to everything and they're creating connections on their own and it's not being facilitated by the teacher, right?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's so many powerful things here. I mean, we run a community manager university program and we spend a lot of time on events. Actually, March is event month. So our content and discussions are really focused on events. And we have this event planning guide. And we spend a lot of time trying to help people come up with ideas and also a framework for figuring out like what will your members like who is your member type, and then we have this whole framework for kind of figuring out and surveying them certainly to see what they would like, but it is still the onus is still on the community manager to sort of guess, right? And then host
Mhm.
these repeatable events and hope people come. And a lot of times community managers get really deflated when people don't come to events. And I love this conversation because it's not necessarily that people don't want to engage, although some communities don't, right? Like I always caution people, hey, you might have a group of like moms who are like working moms. They got to be out at 3 for school pickup. They're not coming to your happy hours, you know? So it's like you sort of have to know your audience and you can't take it personally if they just are in a season where maybe they're not going to engage as much. But you might Kahoot sounds like a community where people are kind of there because they want that connection. And I do want to ask a little bit about Cahoots. So Cahoots does not have an office product. Is that right? So it's
Yeah, they only have three small private offices
okay. So it's
and then
most
everything
people,
else is
yeah,
open.
which also impacts the community because you don't have a bunch of like service professionals and people who are like, I got to go to my office and talk to clients all day. like, like it's a maybe a different, slightly different community. How many square feet is it? How big is it?
At 25,000, I believe.
25,000
Mhm.
with no offices.
So there are companies inside of here.
Huh.
So, for example, it's three historic buildings combined. The building
Okay.
in the middle is a cafe, coffee shop that's open to the public, and then also a large event space.
Okay.
And then the second floor above that is the kitchen and common areas for the co working space. And on either side are two other historic buildings, which are both two floors of open space, but some of them are occupied by small teams or
Okay.
larger teams. So there are some larger teams that will take up a whole section. So there's a variety. And so there's a few larger teams, some small teams, and then open co-working spaces.
Okay.
And then
Got
a
it.
lot of dedicated desks too.
Huh. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot happening here. Interesting. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think this is so interesting. Okay, I am curious. So, you had some folks try some things like the name tag example. Anything like just didn't work? Like the rock paper scissor example. You're like, well, somebody organized. No one came, which is going to happen. So, I'm just curious, like, did that happen, and how did you in the group handle that?
Don't think that anything
Everything
hasn't
worked. Yeah,
worked yet, but maybe it's just iteration. So, for example, name tags, not everybody wants to have a name tag. So, that's not really, but I think that everyone wants to know each other. And so,
hmm
I think it's one of those things where it's up there, but not everyone wanted to kind of have that. And so, but what was kind of inspired by that is that, so what I did was in the member newsletter that I write up and send out to everyone, I kind of said, "Hey, welcome. Here's your community committee." Or at that time, I called it an advisory panel for the first 3 months, but because it ended up being so
it
focused on the
sounds really
community, but
boring. Yeah, community panels.
it
Yeah,
does.
committee
And then
sounds
it's
way
also,
better.
I mean, advisors, they were kind of also giving us insider feedback on things that we might
Yeah,
not see, which was really
sure.
helpful. But, anyways, I said, here's some of the initiatives they're working on. So we had some people who were hosting a mentorship event with a professional, like lunch and learn, kind of ask anything. They had some people doing a volunteer thing. We had the name tag thing. We had the different things. And then what happened is that other people saw that and got inspired. So someone else said, "Oh, I saw you working on name tags, but I actually kind of had programmed this thing where they had kind of we used it a little bit, but they programmed this map just for our space where people could actually digitally put their name, attach their name to their desk with their Slack and different things like that." And so they helped us
That's so
expand that
cool.
and yeah, and add that in. And so the physical name tags are still there if people want them, but then also people can put their information in digitally there. And so I kind of like the inspiring imitations or iterations because I feel
Yeah,
like when I don't feel like if something doesn't quite take off, it's never a
totally.
failure. I
Yeah.
feel like it's a starting point for imitations and
Mhm.
um I don't know, iterations where yeah, then just so I feel like the one-on-one copies is probably becoming a better facilitator for people starting to connect, but name tag thing is still in progress. I don't know.
But it's
Yeah.
cool that that guy, maybe you would never know that he had that. He was like, "Well, I have this thing. We could use that too." I mean, it's very, very I love that. I also just I really like this because you're trying to create like more authentic connections, not just happy hours. And I think this is like a real, I mean, it's really aspirational for co-working spaces, but it is also like a real skill. And you like stumbled onto it a little bit with this experiment. But, when people have friends at work and they pre-COVID, this used to be, sort of common knowledge. Like if you, not common knowledge, but they would do studies and show that if you had at least one friend at work, like a pretty good friend that you could go to lunch with or, chit chat or vent to or whatever, you were like many times more likely to stay in the job. Like you might not like your manager, managers were very important, but like the work friend, was really critical. And it's not that easy to make work friends at co-working spaces, like real friends. Like you can go to happy hours and sort of stumble into people, but I think that's sort of the real goal is how do you help people form those connections? And I don't know if you've looked at this, but I have to think that drives member lifetime value. Like they stay, member retention. Like just like you would in a workplace, like, well, if you have a friend and even when people are sort of part-time, like I think one of the challenges with part-time memberships is people fall back into the inertia of their home office, right? Like they go on vacation and then they sort of get into this habit of like working from home, which a lot of people can do, and then they just stop going to the co-working space, right? And they cancel their membership. But having the friends, again, even if it's not like they're doing something every day with this person, but they've got the Friday lunch or they've got something or a project they're working on. Like that's really
Yeah.
sticky, I would think. Do you have a sense if
Yeah.
that's true?
No, I agree. And I think that again, I'm gonna just go back to being an introvert, right? Like for me, working on a project with someone is a way better way to connect and form than small talk. And so I think people talk a lot about the water cooler conversations. And I do like those a little bit. Like I said, I'm not great at small talk. And so maybe that's not, but for me, I mean, I guess for me, it takes the water cooler conversations from just like some random conversation about the weather and all this thing to a purposeful conversation where now when I bump into somebody, we're having a water cooler conversation around a project that we're working on. I had this idea for our thing, right? Or seeing other people kind of start to do that where they're going to lunch, but they're going to lunch to like ideate together. And it's just a much deeper,
Yeah.
I feel like it's just an accelerator for deeper connections, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
for
And
me,
I mean,
that's
it
really valuable.
yeah, I like this so much. I think when we talk about loneliness, it's considered an epidemic. And so, but there's a so they, I've seen articles talking about like the minimum, impact you can make on somebody is like a water cooler kind of thing. Like they say if people are lonely, like you don't need, interaction with your best friend every day, but you need some, other human interaction. And it could be like
Mhm.
the really friendly barista at Starbucks or the community manager at the co-working space who, gives you a nice greeting and tells you they like their, your shoes or whatever. But that's that on the spectrum, that's like minimum, right? Like it's having an impact, but it's not what we really want for people. And what you're describing, and again, not everybody's going to opt into it, but I love that you are an introvert and you're talking about how it works for you.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it
And
was bizarre for me. Well, go. I'm so sorry.
no, I just keep thinking about, I really do think that a lot of community managers want to achieve this, but the how is hard. And also having a community that's open to it. I mean, I would caution people listening, like your community may not, they may, but I also like the fact that you can make it social or you really could make it professional. Like your interaction started like on a professional project, which is, probably a lot of people would be interested in that in some sense, like mentorship or learning, either side of that. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Oh no, yeah. And actually, to your point, I was gonna say, like, not everyone socializes the same as me, and some people do need that. Like, even in one of the programs that I first created when I started helping out here was basically inspired by my experience of being in a stand-up meeting every morning. And when I would go there in person and I'd be physically connecting with people in the stand-ups, I thought, wow, this is 5 times better than trying to sit. And so one of the things I started was a midweek stand-up for remote workers. I called it Flock, and it was like a morning coffee hour where we did kind of this is where my old days as a teacher comes in. We would do a rosebud thorn exercise of like a win, something you're looking forward to, a thorn. Sometimes it's just one or the other. And it was just a little structured, but then it gave people ways to share what's going on in their week, what they're working on. And then when they ran into each other, it was like, how was your friend's baby shower that you're working on that thing for? They had points to like follow up with each other on.
Mhm.
But what happened is that then when I stopped hosting it every week and we split it between 4 people here at the co-working space taking turns, not everyone who hosted the flock, which I call it flock because it's inspired by my chickens. So I had some chickens in my backyard. I love chickens, and I was watching my chickens hanging out as I was being a remote worker by myself. And I was like, man, I need my flock. Um, so made a flock for remote workers, and some of the people who lead it like do more of a casual, just coffee chat. And some people really like that because it
Mhm.
turns out that my structured thing was anxiety inducing for them.
Oh, like I
But
have to
for
think
other
of the 3
people,
things, and then I have to say it out loud, and what if I don't have a thing? Yeah, okay.
mhm. But for other people, going to a thing where you're going to have general small talk and you don't know what you're going to be talking about is also anxiety inducing,
Totally. Yeah,
right?
or not a good
And
use of
so
time or yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so we rotate it. Like I do my rosebud thorns at the first of the month, like monthly recap, come and share if you want. 2 other people do one where it's more of a casual banter. And then another person leads a silent book club block where everyone kind of brings books and they can read quietly while they eat their lunch or they can talk and just kind of people get to self-select. So yeah, different people connect in different places. And even similarly with the community committee, we broke it up. So after 3 months, they said they wanted to do it. We broke it up into 2 groups. And one is the connections committee, which is more focused on helping people get connected personally and professionally through whether it's one-on-one coffee connections or mentorship circles or different things like that. And then the other one is just social events, the happy hours, going and volunteering, going to a basketball game, whatever. And so we kind of have 2 different groups. We meet all together and then we kind of do a little huddles and then come back together. And it is kind of two different ways of approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many good things about this because one of the things that keeps coming up for me is like the community building. Part of the reason community managers do the same, you're like, well, and then the weekly happy hour, and then the weekly bagels on Friday. It's like part of that is because community building is like not that scalable. So it is hard for the community team to just own it. And what you're talking about is really like, you know, admitting sort of this like we're going to do a bunch of different things for different types of people, but spreading that out. It's not the community team has to own it all. It's, member led. And so that's just it's such a great way to do
Yeah.
it. And I even love your example about like how the coffee chat works because that's something I think it's really hard to remember, especially if you are an introvert. And I think most community managers are pretty extroverted. Some are not, and so we don't relate to like what the introvert might, might be feeling, or those feelings of anxiety, about the share around the room. Or I would be hesitant. I love the share. I'm an Enneagram 3. Have you ever done anything with the
Oh yeah,
Enneagram?
I'm a 4-wing 3, so I'm
Okay.
the moody broody artist, except for I actually have some motivation to do stuff with it.
That's probably pretty powerful. That's really interesting. But so my co-host for my other podcast, Giovanni, introduced me to it, and I think about it all the time. I think it really changed my life because it just helped me really understand how different people are. Because I just think we forget often. Like your example
Right.
of like not everybody wanted to do the rose thorn and the what
Mhm.
like I do think it's hard to remember how different people are and how they come to the table with different feelings. And so anyway, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And
No, for
yeah.
sure. And that's where I feel like my background as a special education teacher coming into, I would say Cahoots has a lot of, it was founded by 4 tech founders
Okay.
actually. And so what happened is that they created a company and were successfully acquired. And then they wanted to, at the time, there weren't really any co-working spaces in Ann Arbor,
Yeah.
and there wasn't really a lot of flexible office space. And so they were
Mhm.
kind of really some of the first people to say, we want to create this space for other tech companies and people to have a space to get started. And so it does have a lot of tech people, but I would say now we also have a lot of creatives. We have a lot of other type of entrepreneurs. We have a lot of remote workers. And so it's not just tech, but there's still
Yep.
a lot of tech people. All that to say that I found that tech people tend to be very neurodivergent. Special education is all about
Mm,
understanding neurodivergent brains. And when I
yeah.
was creating a classroom for that, it's all about accommodating different styles of learning and approaching things. And I feel like maybe in something like a community committee, you can kind of let different people, whether it's different enneagrams or different brain types or whatever,
Yep.
come up with a solution that's best for their brain and other people are that you might not have thought of, right?
100%. Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, Ann Arbor is a very interesting market, and I suspect I did a feasibility study on it recently. Also, when this goes live, Amanda Lewin will call you immediately. Have you met Amanda? She runs
Yes.
Bamboo, okay? She's awesome. She's really awesome and does a lot of community work too. She's gonna love this, I'm sure. But Ann Arbor is one of those markets I suspect it's also remote worker friend like just growing in all those areas post-pandemic because
Mhm.
you can live in Ann Arbor, which is a great college
Yeah.
town, and tech transfer from the university and all those things that are happening. So,
That's
um,
it. Oh, I was just gonna say it was interesting because it's reminding me of something you said earlier that I was thinking about just the better. I think that talking a little bit about, this is ways that this can benefit a co-working space, ways that can benefit the members. I think also the greater community. It's been really fascinating for me to meet people I'm working on public health in Maryland. I'm working on education in Arizona, whatever, and they're here. And I
mm,
guess my thought is just, I wonder, it's really cool post pandemic how much remote work has opened up way for people who maybe work in one place to still be by their family or whatever it is. But I also wonder what the greater impact is then on your community when you have a bunch of people come in who are working out of there, but actually have no real authentic connection to the actual place that they're living in. And so I wonder just what are the ways that co-working can provide a meaningful place to actually feel like they're contributing to their actual community and bring in their brains a little bit more to feel engaged in the place they're living in.
yeah, that's so interesting. Like somebody could be working on right. education in Arizona and but not yeah, what's their connection to that locally or anything locally when your work
Yeah.
life is yeah, like in another state. It's so there are so many post-pandemic, challenges and opportunities, I guess. Okay, I could talk about this all day long, but I have to let you wrap up. So, your committee decided to, keep going. Any like in the last couple of minutes, like lessons or like if somebody listening today wanted to try this, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think that definitely starting by asking people first what it is they want and what ideas really helps set the tone for people to create what they want and feel more autonomy and ownership for it. And that, but then kind of from there, giving them having a few guidelines of it can't be this, right? So maybe having some general structure or guidelines of what, you know, if there anything that it has to include or cannot include, maybe setting those parameters up front so that they don't just wild. And then I guess the second thing is I definitely noticed that people who partnered with other people to kind of work on initiatives, it seems like we're able to get the most traction because, and this is where I feel kind of bad because I think I wasn't able to one on one meet and kind of conspire and collaborate with all the people who are working on individual initiatives as much just for time
Yeah.
but then I think that maybe if I had known what I know now, I might have maybe upfront more proactively tried to encourage people who had similar interests or ideas to kind of create little groups of 2 to 3 to work on an initiative together from the get-go, because I think that's probably the most valuable component is being able to work on it with other people and maybe even like, yeah, 2 or 3 that you have a little bit of support.
I think also when you're doing something, sort of launching something, it can be hard to do it on your own. You have questions, you want to, this is totally not the same, but it's kind of a similar effect. I run our local rec soccer group. And we've been talking recently about like every role needs to be pairs because there's so many things that come up that you just want somebody else's opinion on or you want to brainstorm on. And even that I noticed too, which is like the theme we've been talking about, like people who have connections, like they just want to stay longer, right? Like if they're not really integrated and they don't build relationships, then they kind of bounce out. Like they thought they wanted to volunteer and they do it for a little bit and then they kind of bounce. But the people who get
Yeah.
really involved with in small groups with the other members or have a buddy that they
Yeah.
just work really well with, they stay for a long time. So, yeah, I do think the pairs piece just
Yeah,
can be
and
useful
having
in
a
so many
friend
ways.
that isn't a co-working staff member, right?
Right.
Like like, no, there's
Totally.
nothing wrong with that, but being
Yep.
able to yeah, and also that's for me, I think that I don't have the time to meet and collaborate and ideate outside of the committee menu with every single individual person.
Mhm.
So not only is it I can't do this, but also the thing that I think that's gonna keep them there more than their friendship with its co-working staff members, maybe
Mhm.
their friendships with all the people there, and if that my idea is to create a ripple effect that just kind of grows beyond my reach, I want to step back as much as possible and just kind of start it going and not be micromanaging all those connections and initiatives.
Totally. Yes, I love that phrase, like the micromanaging. You don't, right? And also the community team will shift over time.
Mm.
So it's not sustainable for the community, for there to be one person on the team who owns it all because then what happens? So you're
Yeah,
creating a more sustainable approach.
yeah.
Okay,
Like,
so
I'm like, I probably won't always be there
yeah.
either, so
Yeah.
to have them feel empowered to create whatever they want is gonna be the most successful long term, right?
Okay. Thank you for diving into all of these details. I think this is fascinating and really interesting and probably very thought provoking and exciting for all the co-working space owners and community managers who are listening. Will leave us with what are you most excited about that's next for this group?
Yeah, I'm excited on how they can build on it and bring in new members because now other people want to be a part of it. So I think that's going to be a really exciting part is to see how other people how they can kind of grow together. And I don't know. I think we're still all figuring it out, everyone here. So it'll be interesting, and I'm excited to hear if anyone else tries it, what works for them because yeah, I think there's a lot of cool things, and I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I think it'll be a good place.
Okay, if somebody wants to share what they're up to, what's a good way to connect with you?
Sure, you could find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So
If they
I
message you,
don't.
you'll get the alert.
Yes, so
Okay.
I haven't updated my profile with in a very long time, but I do manage it for Cahoots LinkedIn, so I am on there on a
Okay.
day-to-day basis. So
Okay,
you can
great.
always
That's
find me
perfect.
there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing your experiment. And I mean, it was really out of the interest in, hey, what if other people can learn from this and want to try it? And we really just appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and if anyone has any ideas, I that's why I love being able to share because I'm sure other people have other insights that I wouldn't even
Yeah,
have since I'm brand new to co-working, right? But yeah, I really
totally.
appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.